So that's wonderful. Great, cool. And if you haven't, it's, you know, the entry point is totally fresh for you right now into this compassion. So I always just give a little introduction into the Brahma Viharas, and I think something I haven't said before, but that the Buddha explicitly said, is that the Brahma Viharas, these inner qualities, they're said to be strength and also to give strength. So they do something they're good news for us as human beings. It's like good food, the Brahma Viharas. I often mention that, you know, the translation as divine abodes, and that Brahma, godlike, and Vihara, home, so godlike homes. And as I say, that it's said that, you know, I think we can feel this in our own experience, that we usually visit them for short times and then we're kicked out again. Sometimes it's like we can be kicked out back into the cold, or the metaphor I've been using lately, the back lane of our minds, you know, back into habits of worry or stress or obsessive thinking, of different mind states that are not as comfortable to rest in. I've used different metaphors over many years. Many of you will have heard me for the Brahma Viharas, sometimes like a warm fire, like the feeling you can have when you're sitting around a group of people that you trust, and you're being warmed by a fire outside. Evokes a certain quality. Or I think of the Brahma Viharas as if you've been quite lonely for some time, or you haven't been feeling quite met, and then finally you sit down with a very old friend who you feel really sort of understood by. And we could see this as, you know, this is what actual Sangha or friends can give us, but also the inner friend, what we can give ourselves when our heart starts to enter our own experience. And that can be incredibly relieving. Or also another metaphor of like a green ditch. So, or the waterways that can run through a city or nature, where wherever there's water, there will usually be fertile ground around. So, a place that gives life. And something particular about the Brahma Viharas, these four qualities of equanimity, you could say deep calm, capacity to meet, you know, all the different expressions of life that move through us, and have some part of us that can stay deeply seated. And then, as you know, the metta, this loving kindness, and joy, upekkha, that we will come to next time I'm here. But then this compassion, karuna, these qualities. And that these qualities are, they're ones that can lift us out of a sort of claustrophobic or tightly bound self. So the sort of anesthetic of our self-consciousness can be aerated, and we become more clearly relational beings, because the Brahma Viharas are wanting to situate us out of isolation in a very relational context. And in time, the Brahma Viharas, as I mentioned, want to include more and more people in our frame, in our lens, to start to see more and more of the life that's actually around us, to participate with more of life that's around us. So these qualities are also very natural to the mind. It's not like they're impositions, something that you've got to kind of find somewhere else and then impose upon yourself, you know, it's something more natural to the being that through a dedicated practice will start to surprise us at times. And I think we see this when we're on a meditation retreat, because there's something that supports these qualities to mind, is a mind that can start to settle. And we know when we're not so preoccupied with our woes or with our obsessive thinking, which is so part of being a human being, navigating this, when something starts to clear in our perception, and we just start to see things around us, we start participating with our life in a very different way, and we start to have contact. You start to really see that leaf on the tree. You start to really feel that heavy sensation in your chest. Or you might look at the ocean and you feel the expanse, and in that contact, there is some meeting and some charge, connection. We start to be able to see a little bit more nakedly, we could say, and in that, insight can come and clear seeing can happen. We can cut through things. And the Buddha speaks about when we settle, that there's something like the inner eye that can start to open, an inner knowing. And I think we all know that when we have flashes of insight, when we experience something that's going on for another person, or we experience something in our own life, and we catch something, and it feels very, we feel on, but it's a little bit deeper than the mind, that sense, very precious natural intelligence that we can start to feel instinctively. The Buddha would use that language that the inner eye can start to open. We have this contact. And I often, I can speak about what was happening when people were practicing in those forest groves with the Buddha, close to the roots of trees, and with the breath and settling the mind, and then how they would start to see, and how certain preconceived ideas or certain cultural views or certain ways, stereotypes we may put others in, would start to be dismantled. These concepts would start to be dismantled because we'd be getting very direct. And I often use, and many of you know I love this, the example of the monk going for a walk and coming upon the girl who was a lower caste girl in that day, often called the untouchables or the Dalits. And this girl was drinking from a well. She saw the monk coming, bhikkhu, bhikkhu. She moved out of the way because the view was that if the monk would drink from the same water she was drinking from, that he would be poisoned. This view. And the monk watches this whole thing happening, sees the truth of the girl, the natural dignity, the incorrection of that view. No, I can drink from the same water as you. And her response. And the natural compassion flowing between that monk and the girl, him feeling her in that, under the thumb of such a profound cultural view that distorted so many people. So through this clear seeing, we can start to see the truth of situations. And then in that connection, compassion can start to flow. And this capacity of compassion to be able to look at something with an open gaze. The way just when we can give our own practice, our openness, the gift of our own openness, what can start to unknot and unravel. I don't know if you've ever been held in a very warm, spacious gaze, and how that can kind of unmask us almost. I think of sometimes how disarmingly open and clear the Buddha's gaze would be, like Jesus's gaze, and having that love light shone on you, what that can kind of restore in a human being, just being held in genuine care. So compassion is sometimes it's translated as a trembling or a quivering in the heart in response to another's pain. So actually feeling yourself stirred, affected by another's pain. The Latin term compassion, the willingness to feel with another. And I think on a world level, lately, I imagine many of you and all of us experiencing what has just kind of lit up and inflamed the world in all of us witnessing George Floyd's death in America and hearing the words coming about out of his mouth, seeing that treatment of such brutality on another human being, and the whole world bearing witness to this, seeing these certain views in a culture, the deeply entrenched racist views that could cause another human being to treat another human being in that manner. And so I imagine many of you probably, in witnessing that, felt that movement of the heart and how powerful that can be. And then that activating all around the world, people standing up and saying, you know, from that heart, this can no longer go on. This is so not okay. You know? And here in Australia, the tens of thousands of people who walked in protest, standing up against, you know, what's happening in our own country, the racism in our own country, and the deaths in custody in First Nations people and Aboriginal people here, and really bearing witness to this, that George Floyd's death kind of activated this around the world, standing up. This is really not okay, because we all saw something, we had contact with something so clearly, and then the response. And I was just not long ago listening to the Labor senator in the Northern Territory, Miss McCarthy, and she in the Parliament was reading out all the names of the Indigenous people who have died in custody. And I'm just going to say a few of those names now as we bear witness. And you will know some of them, and I won't go on and on, but we know there was Tanya Day, JBTC, Mr. Walker, Shordina Wynne, T. Welton, Mr. Clark, A. Eads, and it goes on and on and on. And the recognition that here in Australia, that the families of these people, the brothers and the sisters and the mothers and the fathers, wanting to have justice and equality and fairness, to see, to know what actually went on there with their loved ones. And just as I speak this, and you know, launching into that pretty early in a talk is sort of a strong thing to do, but it's just interesting to notice how do you feel in me just saying that? Just to notice that for a second. What is anything evoked in you? And I think we are asked now, I think we really are asked now in us to sort of find our deep seat, that practice I was speaking about of equanimity, to find our deep seat, to be able to sustain openness to what's going on in front of us, to find our deep seat, to be able to sustain our care and our open eyes. And I think the Brahma Viharas, they are practices to support an emotional maturity, a capacity in us to be able to metabolize strong feelings, emotional maturity, to be able to metabolize strong feelings that move through us. One of the near enemies of compassion is overwhelm, of despair, you know, of being seeing strong things and just being so overwhelmed by the pain that you just, it's just too much. Yeah, and it can really feel like that sometimes. That's what we feel. We feel we'll get overwhelmed. There's so much. How can I stay open to all of this? And then this practice of equanimity to then be able to come back. Because then when we move into that overwhelm, there's a call. Okay, I need more ground. So I'm coming back to how can I find my deeper seat here now? How can I come back into the breath and stay with that? Yeah, and I think all of us have in our life weathered, speaking about, some of us may know families of those Aboriginal people who have died in custody. Some of us may be very far removed, from some of those people, not had clear contact. But I think in all of us, I think we all would have been touched by different people in our life or lives where people, where there were deaths that people had that didn't reflect their dignity as a human being. People who, for many different reasons at that time didn't have access to those Brahma Viharas, to a sense of inner love or self-compassion or calm. We know what it's like, how kind of painful it can get when we're thrown out of that home. And many of us would have had relationships with people with addictions or lost dear ones to suicide. It's something that in the modern life is pretty common. And so that we could say that the fire enemy of compassion is cruelty, is acting in a way where we do not feel the subjectivity of another, when we are right out of connection, where we're not moving from, where there isn't love or joy or compassion and clear seeing. And possibly we also know in ourselves, moments where we, how kind of frightening the inner life and the outer life can get, where love's not around, where there isn't care in a situation. And so in this, I suppose I am saying how powerful it is to keep practicing these qualities of digging in for this kindness, this capacity to welcome our experience, to be open to our own inner life. And that, how we are with this, it affects our own life. It affects the way we walk down the street. It affects the atmosphere around us. And I think as human beings, the safer we are in ourselves, the safer the world is. So compassion is very much, is very much grown. It's fostered through this relationship with our own inner life. And something I love about the Buddha, the way his teaching is not a sanitized one. I was drawing into gritty teaching. He's not sanitizing life. He's like, let's take off the plastic. Let's take off let's take off the sort of smoke screen, and let's really see what we're working with here in this human realm. Yeah. And one of the things we work with is just such a variety of feelings that move through us. And as the Buddha said, this truth of dukkha, the language spoken, the Pali word, language spoken in the time of the Buddha, that in us there is a variety of difficult feelings that move through. Yeah. Sometimes we could feel very awkward. Sometimes we feel there could be hopelessness. Sometimes we don't know what to do. Sometimes we see all the suffering and how can I act? I'm not quite sure. There can be confusion. Sometimes we feel just nervous. Sometimes we feel silly. Sometimes we feel outrageous. Sometimes we feel shamed. Sometimes we feel we've done something wrong. Sometimes we feel fantastic. All of this variety, that this is all workable and that this is all okay. And all of this is what we need to keep opening to. Sometimes we're scared of aging. We're scared of our body ailing. All of this is what we bring this openness to. It's our training ground. And if we were to think that through practice we should be looking like peaceful Buddhas all the time, and if we're not, we're doing something wrong. If we feel unrest, we're doing something wrong. We'd be really off track, because we're learning to find more of the wise relationship with what will naturally keep moving through us as a human being. And if we weren't feeling some unrest at times, you'd probably be kind of, someone would go, well, someone was speaking to a beautiful older man the other day saying, I feel all this unrest. I wonder, did I do enough for the environment? You know, was I radical enough? He was saying to me, it's keeping me awake at night. And it's like, wow, you know, like what a brave question. But yet, how will that be fruitful? Can you also hold that with compassion? He's like, yeah, that will help. You know, so it's not berating again, where we're just perpetuating suffering sneakily, more suffering. How can our inquiry be skillful? How can there be compassion in our questioning? So compassion in this sense, it doesn't fall into pity, which is the near enemy of compassion, where it's like, I'm all sorted in my, you know, my upright, lovely posture, caring for all these sorry folk who are doing it so hard. that kind of high road of compassion. I was like, human being to another human being. Yeah, I've traversed my own aloneness. Yeah, I've traversed my own rage. I've traversed my own deep insecurity. You know, when we get really real about our situation, these are the things we feel. And then we feel when that's happening that we're threatened. You know, we feel, oh my God, like I'm being diminished as a human being because I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling scared. But actually we're being enlarged because our humanity, our capacity to stay open is kind of growing us as we be with what is. And when we start to also see, because compassion is also born from clear seeing, as I said, the mind settles and we can start to see more clear. And sometimes we have these moments when we feel our own pain, say, or certain habits that we have in the here and now. Maybe, you know, sometimes feeling small or pulling back our voice or getting kind of like arrogant when we're scared or getting silly when we actually really have something important to say, or just shy, or, you know, or hiding, or, you know, or we feel kind of just weird or wrong, or I don't know, whatever it is, like, or we have patterns of self-harassment, you know, all this beautiful stuff we work with as a human being, headaches and pain and knee aches and I don't know, you know, midnight terrors. Yeah. When we start to kind of see, wow, some of the way that I am now is because of past conditions. Yeah, there's certain things that have happened in the past, you know, certain incidents, certain relationships, certain environments we grew up in, certain cultural views about being a woman, about being a man, about how we should be in our sexuality, what's acceptable, what's not, that have informed certain sufferings in us. When we start to see the causes and conditions, oh, I'm feeling this because of all of these incidents. You know, you could even say, like, as a woman, I feel fear around speaking sometimes. And that's culturally ingrained, you know. Or I feel like there's a, whatever it may be, I have a deep pain inside of me because there was mistreatment or whatever it is. And you start to feel the causes. You can sort of take, it's like my suffering is not my fault. It's what I have to work with in this life. It's not my fault. I haven't done something intrinsically wrong. And that can aerate the situation, and that can open the heart to give, like, what's inside of us its due. When the warm heart can say, I'm sorry you've had to feel that in your life. I'm sorry that you've had to navigate that and that has been really hard for you. To give that due, a tremendous release can happen when we can hold ourselves with that kind of care. So we're stepping back. And the Buddha's beautiful contribution that we can step back and we can look upon what's moving through us. And we can begin to actually interrupt patterns of suffering with interest, with openness, with kindness, with non-tyrannical judgment. What is going on here? I was so moved as a young person when I first saw the group of women, female prisoners. They were called Somebody's Daughters Theatre Company. And it was women who'd been in prison bringing their stories into the theatre. Maybe some of you saw them. And, you know, really beginning to articulate their experience and see, look, the reason why I landed up here, let me tell you, you know, let me inform of you of the causes and conditions that have led me to this situation. And to start to see the sort of the owning of the story and the refreshed dignity of like, oh, of course I was going to go down that road for a while, and to feel that compassion, you know, as many of you would know that, you know, 90% of women incarcerated right now have been victims of abuse. Most of the crimes are self-inflicted. You know, these cycles that go on, this opportunity to look with compassion, if we get enough support, if we're lucky, to be able to, you know, to then see freshly. And so that restorative nature of compassion. How are we going for time?
We're just about done for time.
Okay, I just have one more thing to say. Is everybody up for that? So, okay, cool. A little bit, we're heading into some sort of very human territory tonight, but I just wanted to say that the one thing is also is compassion. If we're not really engaging, I think, in our own work and the beautiful work of embracing our own, you know, sorry states, embracing in us the what about me, embracing in us the variety of feelings we have, our own anger, our own beauty, our own sadness, we have a tendency to then, if we don't do that, to project that on the others. You know, that I'm going to help this, or scary people out there, or these people so in need. And that projection can be very patronizing, you know, when we're coming to someone but not kind of owning our own situation. And so just the beauty of doing that work, so we can look at others with more space. And that compassion is not always just sweetness and kindness. That I think sometimes it has been misinterpreted in our culture, or that think to be spiritual, then we have to be nice all the time, or we're being good. But compassion is also is not being attached to the appearance of being nice and then using that as an excuse to let ourselves be mistreated. So sometimes we have to, like, there can be a lack of self-worth inside that needs to be fostered, so we can also say, you know, no, actually that's enough, and here is my limit. So compassion, sort of idiot compassion, instead, if we're using it to debase ourselves and just be nice, where a deeper action's called for, we may have to draw the line, and we have to tend to our own shakiness around being able to put a boundary and assert something. And just the last thing, so the Dalai Lama would say, he'd be so surprised by modern people's self-harassment. You know, I think because the sort of isolation in modern culture sometimes, and I think it's slowly changing again, but that, you know, the lack of self-kindness and how much metta is needed in our practice to rekindle that inner instinctive openness in life, so we can be coming at our compassion from a healthy place. So that's quite a lot, isn't there, in a half an hour talk on compassion. Yeah. So thank you for your good listening. May we all just really learn that inner friend and that openness that really can change the flavor of our days. You know, I think we all know what it feels like when we come home to the Brahma Viharas. It is a very good feeling. So just may these qualities just keep growing in all of us for the safer realm inside and a safer world. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jess. I enjoyed the talk greatly. And I actually got into such a beautiful space. I forgot something important that I was facilitating.
Oh.
It's nice to have remembered again. So thank you so